Robert, welcome to Living Off Rentals.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here, man. Just for a little bit of background before we jump in. So Robert is the host of Millennial Investing podcast, as well as Real Estate 101 podcast, which are both by the Investor Podcast Network. And so I've been a big fan of the whole network of your podcasts for quite a while. And I know the founder, Preston, he was actually 2 years ahead of me at West Point, which is kind of ironic. And he's done a great job with that, obviously, and it's grown, and it's just a great source of information. So definitely check out those podcasts. But you also utilize an investment strategy that I've really been interested in learning more about, especially since it's gotten so big after COVID, and that is renting out RVs. So this is a form of short-term rental investing, which is a strategy that I am huge on, but it's on wheels. And so I'm excited to learn more about how it works and what type of returns people can expect and all the pros and cons. So before we do that though, you're a pretty young guy. I'd love to kind of hear about what made you decide to start going down this road of investing in real estate.
Yeah, so I'm 26 years old. I started by accident when I was my freshman year of college. My dad sat me down and said, "Hey, when you graduate college, you start earning a salary, you're going to have to pay me rent." And I thought that was fair. I didn't think that was really unreasonable or an unreasonable ask for him, but I didn't really want to do it. I felt like renting at the time was throwing money away. And so I said, okay, well, I'm 18, I'm going to graduate in 3-4 years. I'm going to try and do everything I can in my power to save as much money and buy a house as soon as I graduate. And I had no intentions of being a real estate investment or anything like that. It was simply, I just didn't want to pay my dad rent, and I was just going to buy a house to avoid that. And so I had been studying Warren Buffett stock investing for about 7, 8, 9 years. At that point, I started when I was about 12 or 13 studying Warren Buffett. And I always had an interest in real estate in the back of my mind, but I always thought you had to be a millionaire or billionaire to invest in real estate. So like I said, I was just buying this as a primary residence, just going to do like I thought most people did. And so I did that. I purchased the house my senior year of college. It was a condo, 2-bedroom condo. And so what ended up happening was I lived in one of the bedrooms, and after like a month or two, I said, I haven't even opened this second door to the second bedroom. I should probably do something with this. So I ended up renting it out to a guy I met at the gym, and he paid $700 to $750 per month. And it cost me about $1,100 total with HOA, principal, insurance, taxes, everything. So I was living for $350, $400 a month. And one day I just realized that there was no way that I was the first person in the world to ever do this. So I started to do a little research and ultimately found that this was a strategy called house hacking, and found bigger pockets. When you found bigger pockets, I found thousands and thousands of other people who were doing what I thought was impossible in real estate at the point of where I was, but I realized that they were no different than me. Knocked down every limiting belief that I had about real estate. And from there, it's just kind of been history.
Nice. That's awesome. So that was your first deal. So what'd you end up doing with that deal, and how did that kind of evolve into others?
Yeah, so I rented that out for about a little under a year, but I ended up selling the property because when I purchased it, like I said, it was a condo, so it was in a homeowners association. And when I bought it, they were undergoing what's called a special assessment, which means they're going through a large project in the community, but they didn't have all the details of exactly what it was and what it was going to entail. But I kind of made a gamble and bought it anyway. Turns out that they had about $6 million in reserves, and they put $6 million into the community. It was a little over a $7 million project. So the difference is just about $1 million or so that had to be split over a little over 100 units. And so we got about, if I remember correctly, we got about $50,000 worth, $60,000 worth of work for about $10,000 out of pocket for each unit owner. And so that made not only the value of my unit go up quite a bit, but it also made just the value of the community go up because the community was significantly nicer. And so I ended up selling that condo and purchased another house hack, which is called the live and flip. And then I did that for 2 years.
I see. Okay. And so that's what you're living in now.
No, I've since moved on from that one. That was my second house hack. And I'm
Okay.
currently sitting in my third house hack right now. This is a side-by-side duplex. I sold the previous one because it was a live and flip strategy, which is typically not kept. It's usually flipped like a property is. So that's what I did with that one. And in between there and here, I got in rentals as well.
Got it. Okay. And so how did you land on your current strategy, your rental property strategy? Like where do you target now? What's the deal to you? Because everyone I talk to, it's very different for every individual, what they consider to be a deal. And I think that's hard for new investors to wrap their head around. They're like, well, it should just be the same, but there's so many different factors that apply to different people and different strengths and different, values that people bring to investing. And so for you specifically, how'd you come up with your current strategy and what is it?
Yeah, I mean, so many people have different requirements for their money. Some people need strong cash flow. Some people want appreciation. Everybody has different requirements or beliefs on what good appreciation or good cash flow is. I hear all the time there are people in California that buy in other markets that think the returns are great when the investors there think they're horrible. Yeah. Or from even out of the US will invest in California and people are like, how are you buying this? Because the cap rates are just so low. But it's because compared to where they are, it seems good. So everybody has their own perspective for sure. My strategy mainly is long distance rental properties. So just traditional rental properties, but just not near where I live. And so how I fell into that was during my second house hack, my live and flip, I wanted to buy a traditional rental. I said, okay, I've got a little bit of experience. I've bought in 2 properties. I know how it works. I'm comfortable with this. I can do a regular rental. But I live in the Boston area, and a traditional rental that was going to make any money was roughly $400,000 or so. And with a traditional, this was before I knew anything about BRRRR investing or low money down creative strategies. And so I was looking at roughly $100,000, $120,000 down in cash just to buy a property. And I was like, man, that's not really possible. And then, with a business partner or 2, I was able to maybe scrape together the money to buy one. But I said, I could buy 4 units for $120,000 with not that much cash flow. It doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. And it seems very risky for my first deal. So then I stumbled on to a gentleman named Neil Bawa, and he taught me this strategy about how to use demographic data to find markets that are promising for rental properties. And his strategy just really spoke to me because my background's in finance and accounting, my studies. And so this data-driven approach to real estate really, really spoke to me. And so ultimately what I did was I said, all right, I'm going to go long distance. I can buy a $65,000 single family house in Texas, and my mortgage will be $450 a month. It'll have rental income of $950 per month. I said, that seems like a pretty good deal. Super low risk compared to having to put up $120,000. And so I got started with my first rental that way. And then I've scaled there since to 5 in that same market and continue to house hack and RV rentals.
Interesting. Can you say those numbers again? So you said that was in Texas, right?
Yeah, it was in Texas.
What market is it?
In a town called Wichita Falls. It's about an hour and a half west and north of Dallas.
Okay, got it. And you're buying them for about how much, and what were the numbers?
So I've scaled up a bit since that first one. That first one, I believe it was $60,000 or $65,000. The total mortgage was like $450 or so, and it rented for $950. Today, I ended up buying another one for like 75, and then I bought another one for 105, and then the most recent was like 125 or 150, somewhere in there for the most recent ones. And the rent have scaled from there as well to $1,100 to $1,500 per unit per rental. But again, the mortgages range from $500 to $750 per unit.
Nice. Yeah, that's always a good sign when you're buying them on the upswing like that as rents and prices are going up. So those sound like solid deals. You're actually the second guest in a row that has mentioned Neil Bawa. I know he's a big name in the data analytics space. What was it that he shared with you that pointed you to Wichita Falls, Texas?
So the biggest question that I had was, how do I know if a market is good or not? And that's what most people like question when they go long distance. It's not so much how do I do certain things, or how do I, find a property or any of that. It's just, how do I know if I'm even buying in a good market? That's the first step. And so Neil kind of got rid of that question. He helped us find which market was good. And so he didn't necessarily help me for Wichita Falls specifically, but what he did was he told me how to find it. And so what I ended up doing was, I knew the demographic data points I was looking for. And so I hired I guess you call him a software developer or some sort of programmer, who created a web scraper for me and scraped this data off the web. It cost me like $200 to $250. And what he did was he sent me an Excel file with the 6 demographic data points that we needed for 7,000 cities across the US. Then I spent some time in Excel, and I basically ranked every city based on a weighted average formula of the 6 demographic data points. And I ranked every city from 1 to 7,000. And then from 1 to 25, I took the top 25 and I said, okay, these are the types of properties I'm looking for. Let's cross off any cities that don't have the type of properties that I want or within the price range that I can afford. And then I also crossed off any cities that didn't seem to have real estate professionals, whether it was a lot of real estate agents, electricians, plumbers, any contractors you might need. If it didn't have those types of people, then I crossed those off as well. And then I was left with roughly 10 to 15 cities that met all my criteria. Started to make offers on all of them. Basically, I think I had like 13 offers out at one time, from Idaho to Texas to Alabama, Florida, Ohio, North Carolina. I mean, we were all over the place. And we basically just said, whichever market we get a deal in first, we'll continue to invest in. It just so happened we got our first deal in Wichita Falls, and it's done really well there. We built a really good team, and we just continued to scale there.
That's interesting. Wow. It's a really smart way to approach it. I don't think most people do that. They kind of fall backwards into their investing area typically. But do you remember the 6 factors that you're looking at?
Yeah, I do. And to your point about where people kind of fall back to, I heard a quote. It was a really perfect timing. I heard a quote that said, live where you want to live, invest where the numbers make sense. And I kind of heard that right at the same time that I was learning about Neil Bawa, and it just kind of all came together that it just made so much sense to me. And yeah, the 6 demographic data points I look at are population growth, income growth, house value growth, so the value of how properties are increasing, decreasing, the crime level, the crime change. So if the crime, we want to know where crime is at, but we also want to know if crime is going up or down. And then also job growth. So are jobs going up, or are jobs fleeing the area?
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. And when you look at values, like value growth, how do you determine, are you looking at how much it's grown up till now, or are you projecting how much you think it's going to grow in the future?
So every data point we look at, including house value growth, was from 2000 to the year that we're in. So say 2000 to whatever year we're in now. It's not a guarantee that that's going to continue into the future, but I'm also not looking for markets that are, you usually see on the coast most of the growth, whereas in these Midwest markets, you're not seeing as much growth. Austin, Texas, Dallas, et cetera, are kind of anomalies in that area. But I'm not really looking for these to be massive appreciation plays, but rather just that they are appreciating a little bit, at least over the last 10 or 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah. While you're sitting on a huge amount of cash flow.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. That's awesome. And so how did that lead you into investing in RVs and renting out RVs?
So the two are a little bit disconnected. The only way they're connected really is that they're both rentals, in the sense that I knew I could do it, right? So I figured, okay, I could do this too. Once you start renting something out and you kind of collect the cash flow from it, it's interesting. Like, what else can I buy that I could rent out and just earn cash flow from? And so I would say it's more about house hacking, what I'm doing with where I live, more so than the long distance rentals. Because once I started house hacking, I said, okay, what else can I apply this kind of framework or philosophy to? And RV just happened to be the perfect one for me, because I race motocross. And when you go to motocross races, pretty much everybody at the races, they're 2 or 3 day events. Everybody's staying in RVs over the weekends. And I grew up racing. I raced motocross for about 10 years when I was growing up. And my dad and I traveled the country in an RV. So I knew them very, very well. And once I started racing again, just this past year, I didn't have an RV. I just drove my pickup truck and my trailer, and then I would just stay at a hotel. But I saw everybody around me staying in RVs. And I remember that I used to do it when I was a kid. So I was like, okay, how can I get an RV? I just couldn't really justify it myself. But then one day it just kind of clicked. I said, well, why don't I take the strategy of house hacking and apply it to an RV? So what I did was I decided to buy an RV. I figured I'd use it when I wanted it to go to the races or go on any trips that I wanted. And then I would just rent out when I'm gone. And then ideally, my goal was just kind of break even, maybe substitute some of the costs. I didn't have to pay for the whole thing. So I, subsidize it a little bit, but as long as it could bring in something, I figured it was going to be worth it. And then once I got into the RV rental kind of business, I realized how much cash flow they can actually generate. And from there, I've really decided to try not to use it too much myself, because I'm leaving a lot of money on the table if I don't. So, yeah, that's how I got into the RV rental space.
Got it. Okay. That's awesome. Yeah. It's funny because my wife and I just bought two Airstream trailers that are parked about 100 feet from where I'm sitting right now in our parking area outside. And they're both 1970 something trailers, but along the same thought line. Like we bought 45 acres last year, and we're rehabbing a barn in the back where we've got a Airbnb that we're putting in a residential part of that barn. And then we're going to park these two Airstreams behind it. So we'll rehab them, and I think same thought process, like, the Airstreams cost us like $5,000 or $6,000 a piece. And then, there'll be cost to rehab it. I'm not going to be driving it like an RV you would. So I don't have the actual mechanical expenses, which I know can kind of add up. But when you look at the numbers for us, it's on Airbnb. I know there's other rental sites for RVs. It's really compelling not having to actually put down a foundation and build a house, but you can still get the same numbers in terms of rent as a house. So the one part of it that has held me back and why I didn't jump into it sooner is the appreciation aspect. With the house, you get that appreciation. With an RV, it scares me a little more having a motor in it, and wear and tear. And so does the cash flow just, it's high enough that it kind of compensates for that? Or how do you look at that?
Yeah. So it's a kind of a couple things. It's definitely a depreciating asset. So as we talk through this conversation about RV rentals, I want everybody that's listening to realize that, it is a depreciating asset. You're not going to get the appreciation like you do in real estate. That's one of the major drawbacks. Now, the cash flow can be very, very strong. And if you basically, I buy more brand new, or very, very new RVs. And so they are quite expensive. They're upwards of 50, 60, 70,000. But in a good market, you could pay that off in 3 years, give or take 3 or 4 years, just from cash flow. Wow. You're not going to make any money yourself. You're not going to put it in your pocket, but you could pay that RV off. And so, yeah, 3 or 4 years of work, you're not going to make much, but you pay it off. And then from there, it's not as much of a risk for it to being a depreciating asset because you have no loan on it. And so it's just all profit, more or less. You have some operating expenses, but for the most part, it's profit. And I guess the way I think about it is really good for somebody that either wants an RV to use themselves, or they want to create some cash flow and they don't have a lot of money to get started. So somebody like maybe yourself, or people that have a good amount of money that they could put down on a property, if you can buy a rental, buy a rental. I'm going to recommend you buying a rental over an RV. The appreciation being one of the big factors. But if you don't have a lot of money, you're kind of scrapping to get started, or you just want cash flow and you don't really care too much about depreciation, the RV could be a great way to get started, because if you have good credit and a good job, you can get an RV for 0% down, and you could go buy an RV at the beginning of the month for $0 down and realistically make $2,000 or $3,000 in profit in that first month. So if you're trying to generate some cash flow, definitely possible. Now, the mechanical piece that you mentioned, again, major risk. You could have the transmission blow, you could have the engine blow, etc. But the way I think about it is, your roof on your house is going to cost anywhere from $7,000 to $12,000 maybe to replace on a rental property. Hot water heaters, furnaces, etc., boilers. You have these things that could be bigger dollar amounts in a rental property that can break too. So I guess it is a risk for sure on RVs, but it's not that much different than any other major CapEx items that you might have on a rental.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. And then from a sweat equity standpoint and a management, I mean, and I guess in rental properties called management, there it might be maintenance. How involved are you? Like, do you have to wash the RV once people bring it back? Are you like haven't like what's your hands on? How hands on do you have to be?
So you can be hands-on or you could be as hands-off as you want. It's very, very similar to Airbnb in that sense. So for me right now, I've kind of just up until this point, I'm starting to really systematize it more now, but up until now, I've been the one to do it. And it definitely is more hands-on than a traditional rental. When it comes back, when people take it out or when people rent it, I usually meet them and chat with them for 15, 20 minutes about how everything works, show them around, etc. And then, answer any phone calls or texts that they have while they're out. And then when they get back, usually I'm not there for them to return it. Actually, my RV just got dropped off while we're doing this recording. I wasn't there for it. I just got back from a 10-day trip. I didn't, we kind of have these processes in place now. And then in between renters, depending on how bad it's or how dirty it is inside, which we can talk about if you want to go down that hole, but it usually takes anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half to clean, and sometimes it's only 20 or 30 minutes, but it can be upwards of an hour and a half. And then you have to empty the waste tank, which can take 30 minutes to an hour. So I'd say maybe 2 to 4 hours in between to turn the unit, if you will, for the next renters. So per rental, maybe 2 to 6 hours total. But when you look at the cash flow, it's a pretty good hourly rate. Now you can systematize this. So I've hired a cleaner. Right now there's not a lot going on where I live because it's winter. RVs don't really get rented too much in the winter. So once spring comes around, the bookings start to really increase again. I have a cleaner ready to go so that she knows that when the RV comes back, she'll just clean it for me, pay her like roughly $50 to clean it. And then I've set up videos of basically did the exact walkthrough that I usually do with people, but I've recorded it on camera and I've made it very neat and organized for them. So they know if they're having an issue with the fridge, go to this part of the video. If they're having an issue with the generator or anything else, they can go right to this part of the video. So I don't even have to be there for it. I have a little lockbox on where I keep the RV. They can just grab the keys out of the lockbox, grab the RV and go. And then, I'll still have to answer questions while they're on their trip. But then when they return it, it's kind of the same thing. They'll just put the keys back in the lockbox. My cleaner will know. They'll have to go in and clean it. And that'll be that.
Wow. Interesting. And so you said the cost of one of these new is roughly, $50,000, $60,000. And what can you charge nightly for that in the slower season now and in the higher season in the summer?
Yeah. So I bought mine for 60. Mine was a 2017 and it had about 15,000 miles when I bought it. So it was 3 or 4 years old when I bought it, but basically brand new for mileage wise. I think when I bought it or when it was brand new and the original owner bought it, I think it was 85 or 90,000. And you can certainly buy RVs upwards of 250,000, 300,000. So they can get really expensive, but my personal sweet spot for buying rentals is that $50,000 to $75,000 range for what they call Class C RVs. But your rental rate in my area, and this is going to be area dependent, just like rental properties, rental rates are. But in my area, it's about $247 a night for a rental.
Wow. Jeez. So that's average across the year. So it's going to be probably lower in the winter and higher in the summer.
Yeah. So it's $247 a night from basically say mid-April until the end of October where I live. And then from some people where I live, they just decide after it starts to get freezing, they don't rent it at all. I've decided to still rent it out and I just cut my rate in half. So it's $120 a night. So starting in November 1st until say mid-April, it's $120 a night.
Okay. And they buy their own gas, I assume, right?
Yep. Just like a rental car.
All right. And unlimited miles they can put on it or?
Nope. So they get, and you can set, you can do unlimited miles if you want, but pretty much nobody does that. It's kind of like your cleaning fees on Airbnbs where pretty much everybody does it, and
Yeah.
everybody kind of has a different philosophy, whether you want to go cheap, if you want to go a little bit more expensive. But if you look on the kind of Airbnb sites of RVs, pretty much everybody has a limit on mileage. So what happens is you might get 100 or 200 miles per night that you rent it. So if you rent it for 10 nights, you have 100 miles per night, you get 1,000 miles. Anything over that is X dollars or X cents per mile. And so you actually make quite a bit of cash flow from the mileage. People know that rent, they know upfront that they're going to go over. The last two trips, like I said, I'm in Boston. The last two trips my RV went on, both in December. One person went to Florida and one person went to Michigan, which are both long trips. And so I got quite a bit of money from overage on miles.
Wow, man, that's incredible. Because I assumed, since they're still going to have to pay nightly to park it in an RV park on top of that, plus the gas. So, I'm crunching the numbers. I'm like, man, if I'm going on a trip, obviously people just love RVing because, you can stay in an Airbnb or a hotel for cheap. Like the houses that I rent on Airbnb are, most of them are cheaper than what you're saying just for the RV rental itself. So that's interesting that you can get such a premium. And I know after COVID, like everyone wanted to RV. And did you, is that when you noticed it really pick up?
So I started during COVID, but
Okay.
I have an interesting little anecdote or story kind of about that. So when I started it, before I bought it, I was a little hesitant because I was like, is this a trend? Is this just a COVID trend that people are just RVing because of that? But what ended up happening, what kind of like pushed me over the edge was this experience I had. So I found this RV that I was really interested in buying, and I ended up driving about an hour to go check out the RV. And I got to this small little dealership, and this kind of like little old lady came and welcomed me to the dealership. And I ended up chatting with her for about 2 hours. And turns out she owned the dealership. And so once I found out she owned it, I was asking her tons and tons of questions, right? I'm a podcast host. I had so many questions for her. And so she said, oh, yeah, we just got into actually selling the RVs about this year because we just had so many people that wanted them. So we started to sell them. But for the last 33 years, all we've done is RV rentals. And she had a fleet of roughly 70 RVs there. And she was just this one little, her and her husband shop, but like a pretty big dealership, like lots of bays. They had a whole team there cleaning the RVs. I saw kind of the process in and out. I said, okay, well, I mean, she's been doing this for 33 years. This is not just a COVID trend. And so when I got home, I started to do a little bit of research. And actually back in the 90s, there's a publicly traded company, rental company, if you're familiar with Avis. Avis Budget actually purchased an RV rental business back in the 90s. And so the information was public. I looked at the annual reports back in like 1997. One of the RV rental businesses did 100 million in revenue just for RV rentals. So I started to dig a little bit into, there's a couple companies called like Cruise America or Cruise RVs and some other RV like corporations. And I'm like, you know what? I just don't think that this is just a COVID trend. Between my conversation with this owner and then also just doing a little bit of research on these bigger companies, I don't think it's a trend. Maybe it's a little bit stronger now than it was, historically, but I don't think it's a trend that's going to completely die off after.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I mean, I think RV parks are another area, like it's funny when you start to follow the rabbit hole. I went to a variance meeting in my local area here. We're right outside of one of the newest national parks, which is the Indiana Dunes National Park. And there's just nowhere to park an RV. Like if you want to visit the national park, which now, since they made a national park like 5 years ago, everyone who wants to visit all the national parks has to come here. It's a must stop. So, and a lot of people who do that are RV people, and so they don't have options. And I went to a variance meeting for someone who wanted to build an RV park near the national park. And they said they did research. And for the next 2 years, every single spot around here was booked. And so the demand is just insane. So yeah, that's awesome. It's interesting to start thinking about and kind of exploring. So I haven't looked into that before. So that's great. Well, so for your remote rental properties. Are you managing those yourself, or are those all set up with a professional manager?
No, I self-manage them myself.
Really?
I
Okay.
like to think I'm a professional manager, but yeah, no, I do self-manage them.
So you're hands-on with everything, the RV business and with your rentals. How do you manage that and avoid issues? And how do you show, new tenants the property and sign new leases and do everything remotely?
Yeah. So the reason that I do this is because I kind of pride myself. I think as a West Point grad, you could probably take some appreciation in this, but I pride myself in having really good processes and systems. And so that's why I'm able to do a lot of this. Like I said, the RV got dropped off today while we're in this conversation doing this recording. And it's because I set up a system in place. He already knew where to get the keys because he left his car. So he knew where to get the keys for his car. He knew where to leave the keys for my RV, etc. And so it's the same with my long distance rentals. I set up processes and systems in place ahead of time. So, I mean, not to say that property managers don't add a lot of value, because they certainly do, but a lot of times, a tenant will send them a request, say, hey, we have an issue with maintenance, so we need X, Y, and Z done. And if it's a relatively small property management company, they may not have it in-house. And so all they're going to do is call somebody that can, fix that problem for them, a plumber or whatever, and then they're going to hand that cost off to you. I said, okay, well, why don't I just set up the system to do that? I can, network myself, call around, meet some plumbers and electricians and, all these people that I might need to help fix some problems and build relationships with them, have people that I can trust. And then basically what I did was I set up a portal, just online software for property management or tenant management, really, collect rent, things like that. Anytime somebody has an issue, they just submit a maintenance request from there. I get an email. I just forward it directly to whoever the problem is. If it's a plumber, I just send it to my plumber. If it's an electrician, I just send it to my electrician. And they know to call the tenant and schedule a time to get it figured out, and then go from there. And then they just send me an invoice and I pay it either electronically or I send them a check. So I believe in processes and systems, and with the rentals that I buy, I believe in tenant empowerment a lot.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. I'm the same way. I think there's obviously up to a point where you can, you've got to adopt a new system. Then at some point where you just can't manage it yourself anymore, or need to add to your team. But I'm a huge advocate for self-management, especially in the beginning. I mean, I think you learn so much. And it's, like, I think the benefits far outweigh the little bit of time when you only have, a handful of properties. Obviously at some scale, like I said, there's going to be changes that need to exist. Your systems need to scale with the scale of your business. But I think that's really smart. Last question I've got for you here. So you host, we mentioned, two different podcasts. You have a co-host for the Millennial Investing podcast, but I'm curious, after interviewing so many different people, are there certain interviews or maybe themes from certain guests that stand out as, relating to a higher level of success than maybe some of your others? Is there certain, lessons that you were able to extrapolate that kind of stand out to you?
I'm not sure that there's any specific lessons or so that lead to success more than others, because everybody that comes on the show is successful in their own right. But I think that what the podcast interviews have taught me more than anything is that, anything is possible. And, I already believe that, but more so now because of the people I talk to. You think that all these people you always think that they have something that you don't have. You think that they have some skill or something in them that is just different than you, that provides them the advantage that they need, or whatever the necessary thing is that they need to do what they do. And because of that, you can't do it. But then what you realize is you talk to these people and they're just normal people like you, and they've done, these amazing things. And once you realize that, it's like, okay, if they can do it, I can do it too. And so that's the biggest thing that I've learned from just every guest, all the guests that I've had on the show.
Absolutely. So I've noticed the exact same thing. Like, there's people that I used to put on such a pedestal and say, well, they're unique. They have some unique characteristic that's allowed them to do that. But a lot of times it's just an adjustment in the way they think, that, that's all that's required is adopting that. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. What if people want to get a hold of you, or maybe work with you or find out more about your RV investing company, what's the best way to get in touch?
Yeah, if you want to learn more about RVs, check out realestateinvestingwideopen.com. Tons of stuff about RV rentals on there. I realize that nobody is really talking about how to do RV rentals. People are doing it, but nobody's really talking about how to do it. So I kind of decided to be the guy to go to help people learn how to do RV rentals. So if you're interested in that, you can check it out there. You can check out the 2 podcasts, as you mentioned. And if you want to reach me directly, social media is the best way. Instagram and Twitter at the Robert Leonard. And that you'll find everything else that I'm working on social as well. I talk about it all there. So those are the best places to find me.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for taking the time today. I know the listeners are really going to benefit from this.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. Thanks so much.
Absolutely.